service and SunCoast Cathedral. We're really glad you're with us tonight. Some of you have been here before, and for many of you, this is your first time. But we are delighted to have you here, and I want you to know that you're going to be blessed by this evening's service. I am Sherry Kennedy, the pastor here, and if there's anything while you're here we can do to make you more comfortable, just let us know. I have the privilege tonight of introducing our first speaker, Judy Weinstein. We were reminiscing a few minutes ago. We've known each other almost 22 years. Judy and her late husband, Leon, never failed to be a source of encouragement and inspiration to me personally and professionally. And their imprint is all over this community. They are the founders of the local PFLAG. We're involved in All So Out Youth, the founding of that. Many of the AIDS organizations, and Judy continues to do great stuff for the Jewish community. Let's give her a warm welcome as she comes up.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Sherry, I appreciate it. I appreciate being here because this is my opportunity to see friends I haven't seen in a while. And because I've been up at this mic a few times. And I now have to take the glasses off. 26 years ago, while visiting in Ann Arbor, Michigan, youngest son Mark came out to his father and me. He came out as a bisexual, which he thought would be more accepting by us and society. But it didn't last long. He was 22 at the time and struggling to figure out who or what he was because he couldn't even find a definition to describe himself. The word homosexuality was not a common term and certainly not said out loud in 1988. When he was attending high school in Des Moines, Iowa, there were no sources to tell him what the word meant. No books in the library, no role models. When I talked to Mark the other day, he reminded me that there was only one gay role on TV, on the program Soaps. I'm quoting him now. There was absolutely no context. There was one dismal gay bar in Ann Arbor, much more self-hate than now, an atmosphere of fear and dread, and it was very easy to blame those who were different for the ills of society, and I think it still is. There was the AIDS backlash. President Reagan wouldn't even say the word. Mark, Leon, and I started our journey of education and understanding. Mark became a member of a support group in Ann Arbor for a short time, in order to figure out his role in the world and amongst his friends. And he became involved in the publishing of a newspaper for the gay community, which was eventually distributed statewide, and which, after all these years, still exists in the state of Michigan. When Mark told us he was a gay man, Leon and I were as uninformed as the majority of this country. We didn't have any inkling that our son was gay. He had even brought home a woman with whom he had been living. But he was prepared with information that PFLAG was trying to give to us. Leon, who had some difficulty accepting his son's sexual orientation, went to a national PFLAG meeting and came home excited about starting a chapter in this community, and we both spoke out and became activists. For those of you who have been in this community for a long time, the chapter was in Orlando or in Naples. There was nothing on the coastline. Mark said it was the last thing he expected us to become. There were some blips along the way. For instance, when Mark and his then partner Timmy visited us, and this was in a new community, they took a walk in our new neighborhood every evening after dinner, and I asked them not to hold hands as they walked. Okay, those were the days. Mark agreed for that trip, but was quite frank when he told me that he would not visit again if such curbs were placed on him. I learned very quickly after that Mark and I had a discussion about how long he had to learn about himself, and that it took a few years, and I asked him to give me that same privilege of taking a few years to learn what he was. Mark moved to a gay commune in the middle of the state of Tennessee, where he lives to this day. They own 240 acres out there, no plumbing, but they own the acres. I don't think he could ever have imagined how his life would have developed. For a number of years, he traveled the States with an acting group and eventually took it to Europe. Thus, his network of friends became extensive and so supportive, and that gave great comfort to Leanne and me, that he always had someone he could call on for help. He has told me that in recent years that moving from New York to Iowa made it easier for him to come out because he was just not able to tell his New York friends about his sexual orientation. Today he found some of the commune land, is an editor of educational computer programs, and does some entertaining, playing banjo and juggling. Most importantly, Mark introduced his father and me to a world we never would have known if it hadn't been for him. It added so many positive dimensions to all our lives. And he's a great kid. He's my baby at 49 years old. Now my pleasure, and I've just met Ann this evening, and my pleasure to invite Ann to Bellevue up here. And she has the next generation story. Come on, Ann.
When David called me and asked me to speak, I thought, gosh, I don't think I've ever said anything in less than, 10 minutes. But Judy's a real inspiration. She was very well prepared. And I'm not telling my son anything about the commune in Tennessee. He may be calling next week. But I have been so fortunate. My son's story and mine really started, I was cleaning our condo in Boston, and I got a text, the modern generation, at 6 a.m. that said, I'm gay. And I thought, oh my God. I left him at home with his older brother, who was the least responsible person I should have left him with. I couldn't imagine what had happened, so I was envisioning all kinds of horrible things that had occurred. And so I immediately got on the phone and called him, and he said, no, I've just been having a hard time trying to decide when to tell you, and I figured this was as good a time as any. And at the time, he was 14. So he had been held back, so he was only in 7th grade, I think, 7th or 8th. Neither one of us have very good memories. But he really, he struggled a lot at school, and I think he acted out a lot because of, he's got some behavioral issues anyway, but at 20, I'm here to say he's doing much better. And a lot of it really is just maturity, but I think that nobody in our family really had a problem with it. My concern really was more that he was going to be sexually active at that age. And he said that I put him in a box and wouldn't let him have people in his room. And I said, I wouldn't let you have people in your room no matter what you were. But he's a great kid today, and he's worked through a lot of his issues, but he's really run the gamut of how to express himself and what's the appropriate place for him to be as a gay young man in the world. And I'm really beginning to see signs that he's going to be okay. I too, he didn't have, I didn't place restrictions on him of how he could interact with his partner, but his brother wanted to. And his brother would say, you can't, they'd be watching a movie and they'd have their arms around each other, and he'd say, you can't do that. And I said, well, of course he can do that. And he said, no, it's inappropriate. And I said, then you and Linda need to stop doing that too. So, days. And it's been a real blessing. I work with a lot of gay people. I have become involved with also just through, because Jonathan did go there for a brief period of time. The organizations and the institutions that are available to my son today are just incredible. And every event that I go to, this also is, I'm so hopeful for him because he's got a world to live in that is huge, really. And I hope that at some point he'll become more active. Thank you for letting me speak.
Good evening. I'm David Phillips. I'm a deacon here at SunCoast Cathedral and a member of GAIN. In 1995, my partner and I retired to Sarasota. And soon after, I began my search for a church where I would be accepted and welcomed for who I am. I was informed about an MCC church being planned in Venice at a day's inn. So I made a visit. And at that time, I had no knowledge of what MCC was. I didn't even know what it was about. But I soon found out, and I'm still involved in MCC, which I love dearly. Who'd have thought that 19 years later, I would be standing here today to introduce a friend and a loving leader, one of the most amazing, loving, and faith-filled persons in the world. She is a powerful voice globally for human rights and for equality for all God's people. She is usually globetrotting, traveling near and far to spread MCC's message of inclusivity, and we are very fortunate to have her with us this evening. Let me tell you just a few highlights. The Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson has been in the ministry for over 40 years. She has served in many roles, including as a senior pastor of MCC's founding church in Los Angeles. She was as a vice moderator of MCC, to local blessing us as a senior pastor of Church of the Trinity here in Sarasota from 2001 to 2005. At MCC's General Conference in July of 2005, Reverend Nancy was elected as the moderator of the Metropolitan Community Churches worldwide. She was installed as a moderator at Washington's National Cathedral. She is the only second moderator of the denomination and the first woman. Reverend Nancy has had so many accomplishments and has achieved so much in her life during her years of ministry and as moderator of MCC. Her deep commitment to human work and human rights are unsurpassed. From her active participation on issues affecting those living with HIV and AIDS, in prisoner treatment programs, to issues of women's rights worldwide. Reverend Nancy has stood with all marginalized people, letting them know that they are God's children and all are loved. Surely she has a pastor's heart. In 1979, Nancy represented MCC at the first ever meeting of LGBT religious leaders at the White House with President Carter. Then, in 2010, she was a guest of President Barack Obama at the White House Easter prayer breakfast, and she read the scripture. Then, in 2011, Reverend Wilson was appointed by President Obama to serve on the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. These are only a few of the highlights in Reverend Nancy's unparalleled career in ministry. I ask you now to join me to welcome the Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson, our leader and my friend.
David called me that I was actually home today. First of all, just trying to be able to meet you at last, having read and been so moved by your story and your response. and even more honored to be able to meet you and introduce you tonight. Reverend Dr. Frank Schaefer, who was born in Germany, is a formerly ordained minister of the United Methodist Church, where he ministered for more than 20 years until December 2013. He is married to Bridget and has 4 children. He was educated at Princeton Theological Seminary and also earned a CPE Clinical Pastoral Education degree at Hershey Medical Center's residency program for chaplain. In 2013, Reverend Dr. Frank Schaefer was tried by a United Methodist court for officiating at his son's same-sex marriage and was defrocked over his refusal to uphold the Book of Discipline, which meant virtually to denounce gay marriage rights. Now a United Methodist layperson, speaker, and activist, he continues to be an advocate for human rights. I want to say, Frank, as a leader of a denomination founded by a defrocked minister, that only good things can come. You and your family have paid a price for this. In your hearts, there's something about having your heart broken over the church not living up to the ideals that you hold so deeply in your heart. That is, in our Christian tradition, a crucifying experience in many ways. And I know that you and your family have suffered in many ways. In the disappointments, in the pain, in what it means to leave a happy local church ministry where you felt called and home, to now having to be on the road and then finding out what it's like to become a rock star in our community. Something you probably never anticipated in your life that you ever have to endure or experience. I know for your wife and for your children what it means to be in the limelight or in the press, or to have your privacy challenged, and to have to face choices that you didn't think you'd have to face. As a former Methodist myself, I am so honored by our speaker for his integrity, his courage, his tenacity. One of my fears always when this happens is that people will get picked off one by one. But it takes people who are willing to stay and to not be invisible, to not go away, to not run away, but to face and continue to be love and justice for your denomination and for all of us. There are millions and millions of people whose lives will be touched and bettered and impacted by what you are doing now. Your commitment, your work, your witness, more than anything else, is a powerful, powerful encouragement and blessing to all of us. We thank God for you. Will you welcome Reverend Dr. Frank Schaefer?
I am totally overwhelmed right now. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here tonight. I am deeply honored to be here. And thank you, Reverend Nancy, for promoting me to being a doctor. I always wanted to be a doctor. I take it as an honorary doctor. And thank you, David, Reverend David, for inviting me here tonight. I am so glad to be here. I feel like I'm among friends. You know, I was going over the list of all the congregations that are a part of GAIN. And I was so totally impressed. And tonight I see a true reflection of all of God's children, except the United Methodist Church. And that makes me very sad. Why can't we understand as human beings that we are all God's beloved children, and that our God rejoices in diversity? We are all beautiful in God's sight. God is our Father, God is our Mother. And just like I as a father look at my children and I think they're the most beautiful children in the world, the same way God, our Mother and our Father, looks at us and sees nothing but beauty. And there is pride when God looks at us, every single one of us. Why can't we understand that as human beings? I do have an opportunity now to travel quite a bit and to meet many, many folks like you, and I thank God for that. There are so many supporters, and I did not know that. When I was ministering in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, at the Affirming Zion Church at first for 5 years, and then later at the Zion Iona Church, a lot of Zion churches in Lebanon. For 11 years, I felt isolated. I didn't know that there were so many people that share a belief in the goodness and the grace, the unconditional love of God, who accepts everybody, all of God's children, and who believes that we're all equal in the eyes of God. And it's beautiful to meet all of you tonight and to meet thousands, literally thousands of people around the country that share those beliefs. I am encouraged, my family is encouraged, and actually it is a moment of healing for us. It is a moment of redemption when we meet up with folks like you. So thank you for your prayers, for your support, and for your important work in this community and beyond. I have to tell you that many United Methodist churches I'm invited to are either reconciling, which is the United Methodist expression for open and affirming, or they're on their way of becoming reconciling. Yes. I have no idea how many churches like that are out there, United Methodist churches. And I know from Matt Berryman, the Chief Executive Director of RM and the Reconciling Ministries Network, that they had to hire more people because the demand of churches looking into this process of becoming reconciling has grown so much since my trial. And if that is the only good thing that came out of my trial, I embrace that, and that to me is redemption. Good things are happening. God is turning what man meant for harm and is turning it into a revolution within the United Methodist Church. And that is a beautiful thing, and that is redemptive too. At one of my visits to a reconciling United Methodist Church, the Binghamton Church, Steve Heiss's church, who's also under complaint, I had an incredible experience, and some of you have heard this before, but I need to tell you, everybody needs to know about this. At the Q&A session following my sermon, an older United Methodist lady came up front. She literally came up to me and she said, "Reverend Schaefer, I want you to know that I am upset that they defraud you. In fact, I'm using that word now as a cuss word." And then she demonstrated and said, "What the fuck is going on?" What the fuck is going on in the United Methodist Church? You know, when I performed my son's wedding to another man, I did not want to be rebellious toward my church. In fact, I talked with Reverend Charles tonight. It is so true that so many of us in the United Methodist Church live in fear of being discovered for our theology and our stance. And I lived in fear too. I didn't mean to be rebellious. I tried to be very diplomatic. So when my son asked me, he called me up in 2006 and asked, "Dad, would you do my wedding?" There was no way I could have said no to him, because I love my son so much. And you need to know that there is a backstory, because my son had not always accepted himself for who he is as a gay man. It was difficult for him. He grew up in the United Methodist Church, and faith had always been very important for him. He was very active in my church. He was the model PK, the model pastor's kid. Faith was very important. One day I took him with me to an annual conference. I don't know what possessed me to do that, but I took him with me. I didn't know at that time, he was about 13 years old, that he was already struggling with his sexual orientation. Just so happened in that year, there was a debate on homosexuality on the floor. And it got very, very ugly. This was the very first time that my son learned that his own church, his own faith tradition, believed that he was somehow afraid. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. That's what he heard. And things that were much, much worse, and came across as very hate-filled and hateful to him. He started to doubt his faith. He started to cry himself to sleep many nights, praying to God to make him, quote-unquote, normal, to take this homosexual orientation away from him. When that didn't happen over time, he thought it might be better for him to be gone. And there was a plan in place, he told me. He knew exactly how he wanted to kill himself. When my son came out to us and shared all these things with us, my wife and I were in tears. We had no idea. Yes, we did notice that he seemed depressed. And when he came home from school or from work, he locked himself in his room, and we thought maybe it's just a phase. It must be because he's a teenager and he's going through something. We need to give him space. And my wife and I both had the same thought when we heard his story and he shared his story with us. We were devastated. We were not able to be there for him in those darkest of moments. I can't even imagine what he must have gone through. The darkness he must have experienced, the anguish, the hate he must have felt. and to think that he wasn't comfortable to share with my wife or myself. It's just a horrible thought. And so we embraced him and we hugged him and we said, Tim, we love you. We love you so much, and that is never going to change, no matter what. And then we started to say things to him like, you know, obviously you did not choose this for yourself. You did not want to be homosexual, but you are. But that means that God wanted you to be the way you are, gay and all. You are created in the image of God just like everybody else. There's nothing wrong with being gay. It took him many years to accept himself for who he was created to be, a gay man. And we continue to say to him, you are beautiful in the eyes of God. And I remember him saying things like, if there were a switch on his body that he could flip and be heterosexual, he would do it. Because in many ways he was so traditional, and he'd been conditioned by culture around him, by the church culture around him. He wanted family and children and the American dream. So after he finally, after years of struggling, accepted himself for who God had created him to be, a beautiful gay man, he got to know Bobby at BU, the most expensive dating school in the world. And he fell in love. And after about a year and a half, 2 years, he asked me that question. Now do you understand why I could not say no? It would have negated all of those affirmations that we gave him. You know, there comes a time in every person's life when you have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And that was happening. You know, I knew about the stance of my own denomination, the United Methodist Church. I knew that gay marriage or ordination of gays was forbidden. And so as soon as I hung up with my son, I thought, uh-oh, what does this mean now for me as a United Methodist minister? I'm going to do this wedding, this gay wedding. And there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to do this. I decided that I was going to inform my bishop and my district superintendent in writing that I intended to do this wedding. And I said, by the way, I have 3 gay children. 3 out of my 4 children are gay. And of course, by the way, somebody asked me, what was that like with 3 gay children? Did another child come out every Thanksgiving? Well, it wasn't quite like that. I didn't hear from my bishop. I didn't hear from my district superintendent. I thought they were going to be okay with it then. You know, no answer is an answer too, isn't it? And we celebrated this wedding on April 28th, 2007, in the state of Massachusetts. We call it the good state. In fact, we just recently saw the movie we had made, the video we had made of the wedding, and it was a beautiful affair. It was a beautiful wedding. We were so proud. We were so overjoyed. We had such a great time. You know the story. 6 years, almost 6 years to the day later, a member of my congregation, out of an internal quarrel and conflict, as an act of vengeance, filed a complaint against me. This member was not even a regular member of my congregation. I saw him about once a year. But he drove up to Massachusetts and in the courthouse in Boston got a hold of the document, the certificate that I had signed, filed a complaint 26 days before the statute of limitations would have run out. 26 days. I almost made it. At first, this was a total shock to my family and myself. We thought, oh no, now this beautiful wedding will now be talked about in negative terms, will be criticized, and will become a tool for some very angry and conservative people in my parish to divide our church at Iona. And that's exactly what happened. And it was a very, very painful time. The split went through the entire congregation. It went through friendships. It went through families. One family, a large family, who had celebrated Thanksgiving together for decades, did not celebrate Thanksgiving together that year. It was very sad indeed how relationships were broken, how friendships were lost, and things became very, very hurtful and ugly. But in one sense, I'm glad that I was facing this complaint, because I had been a silent supporter of my son and my children and the LGBT community for too long. It was time for me to come out. Mind you, my wife is a much better person than I am. She had pushed me all these years and had said, Frank, you need to be more specific in your preaching. You need to let people know the truth, that all of God's beloved children are created equal and have equal rights. I remember saying to her, honey, I wish I could, but these people are so conservative. What am I going to do? And I remember her saying one day, she said, Frank, I'm going to put an equal sticker on my car. There's nothing you can say or do to change it. And so she did. And it was duly noted by my congregation. And while I was able to subtly bring in messages and teach, and actually really make a difference in this conservative congregation, so that at the end, when I was facing this complaint and this trial, there were a good number of people at my trial willing to be a witness for me, to speak on my behalf, and to be there at the trial. The sad part was that my congregation was divided at the trial. There were those who sat behind the counsel for the church, the prosecution, witnesses against me. There were those who were supporting me. On my side, the defense side, supporting me. It was very sad indeed. I want to tell you a little bit about this experience that I went through, this trial, this church trial. I had no idea what that was. I never have done a trial before, let alone a church trial. But I want you to picture this. All right, it was actually happening in a gymnasium of a church camp, of a Methodist church camp. A church camp that my children had gone to in previous years. And I want you to picture the front of the room of this gymnasium. There was a long table, and there was a presiding officer, Bishop Gwynn, who acted as the judge. Next to him was his attorney. On the other side was the secretary for the court, and there was a stenographer. And over here, to my left, to your right, there was a section filled with jurors. And all of these jurors were pastors of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. Then straight across, somewhat to the left of the judge, of Bishop Gwynn, was the table for the counsel for the church, the prosecution. And the complainant was sitting there too, and attorneys were seated at that table as well. And then somewhat to the right was my table, the defense's table. And behind these tables was an audience. About 150 people were allowed in, and there was also a section of the table where members of the press were allowed in. On day one of my trial, it was all about finding whether I was guilty or innocent. Of course, my plea was that I am not guilty. And sometimes people ask me, wait a second, you performed this wedding and that was the charge, right? You're charged with performing a gay wedding and you did it, didn't you? I said, yes. So why would you plead not guilty? And I said to them, what other choice do I have? Because if I would plead guilty, it would mean that I would actually validate this law. And the law is wrong in our discipline. I had to plead not guilty. Day one was a very, very emotionally charged and stressful experience. I didn't even know whether I would have a defense. Bishop Gwynn, the judge, had actually disallowed me in the pre-trial deliberations to argue with one portion of the Book of Discipline, our church law, against another, meaning against paragraph 2702, where it talks about the prohibition. I didn't have any witnesses. I wasn't allowed any witnesses. I wasn't allowed any evidence. All I was allowed to say was, I did the wedding. But my attorneys had a great idea. They said to me on that morning, Frank, why don't we just ask you in the stand to introduce yourself? Talk about your family, talk about your calling to the ministry, talk about your ministry experience, and then try to sneak in the story of your son and the wedding. And that's what we did. And lo and behold, even though I was forbidden to really put on a proper defense, I was never stopped. It was almost like, as I started to tell the story of my son and what he went through and how he had been hurt by the doctrine of the church, they wanted to hear the story. They wanted to hear the rest of the story. And I was able to even invoke the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I said to the jury, I said, look, I know that I may have become ritually unclean, just like the Levite and the priest in the story of the Good Samaritan. But I could not ignore my son, who was like this person that was beaten up in the street by robbers. My son was hurt from the doctrine and the laws of the United Methodist Church. I could not turn my back to him. And we all know that the Levite and the priest, they were on their way to the temple to conduct services. They could not become ritually unclean. They could not get blood on themselves. But wasn't it more important for me, as his father, to do this act of love and to help my son who was hurting? I may have violated a rule in the Book of Discipline. I may have become ritually unclean. But didn't I do what our Lord and Savior Jesus taught us to do? And I felt good about getting in this defense and telling the story. And then something horrific happened. The council for the church had a speech, and he started to quote from the book of Jude.
And he started to say horrible things like that homosexuality is sinful, and that if the jury wasn't finding me guilty, they would have to answer on Judgment Day. And it was so horrible and so hateful that I heard a rustling and a gasp going through the crowd behind me. And I looked around, and there were all of these supporters wearing rainbow-colored stoles, standing in protest of what they were hearing. And the council for the church noticed it too and turned around and then said to Bishop Gwynn, "Bishop, aren't you going to stop them?" And Bishop Gwynn, in a moment of grace, said, "Well, you're almost done. Just finish." On that night, I thought I had a good chance. I thought to myself, if these jurors are going to go with the counsel for the church after hearing this horrific, hateful speech, what does that say about the United Methodist Church? And so I said to my counsels, I said, "How big would it be if I got acquitted today?" And they both said, "Frank, it would be huge." But they didn't think it was going to happen. When the jurors came back into the courtroom that night after dinner, I knew something was up. I knew they had bad news because not a single one of them established eye contact with me. They all avoided eye contact. And sure enough, I was found guilty of violating the order and the discipline of the United Methodist Church. I thought I had prepared myself for this verdict, but I found that I was not prepared. Emotionally, spiritually, I was not prepared. I felt that the church that I had served for over 20 years, faithfully, had rejected me and rebuked me, and my heart sank. Day 2 of my trial was all about the penalty. In the United Methodist system, justice system, the jury also finds the penalty. My counsels had worked with me on a very carefully crafted and drafted statement, and I had received quite a bit of coaching. They said, "Don't say this and say it like that, use this word." We already knew that the counsel for the church was going to ask me in cross-examination, "Will you promise never to do a gay wedding again?" And I was supposed to answer, "I cannot answer this question." And then elaborate by saying that I didn't know whether I would or would not agree to perform another gay wedding because it was a hypothetical question. Nobody can exactly predict their actions of the future. And at first, I felt all right with that approach, and I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to lose my career and my security. But as time approached for me to take the stand again on day 2, I just knew that I had to tell the trial court where my heart was. The thought of tiptoeing around the issues and to conform to the church's pressure and doctrine made me actually feel angry inside. I had to tell them the truth. I knew I had to take the stand, no matter what would happen next. But deep down, I also knew that testifying to all that would surely lead to my defrauding. So when we broke for lunch that day, I prayed about it. And it was an intense, desperate prayer. I remember praying out loud, and I didn't even care if people heard me outside of my door. I needed God to hear me. I said, "God, I don't know what to do. I need some assurance here. If I tell the trial court how I really feel, what does this mean for me? Could mean that I'm going to be defrocked and lose my job and my career. Is that what I have to do? Is that what you want me to do? And as I prayed, I wondered what all this meant for my family. I thought about my 2 sons who were still in school and who needed my financial support. I thought about my paycheck, my health insurance. How would I live? What would I do? Ministry was the only thing I had done in the last 20 plus years. And suddenly I had a thought. It was like God was reminding me of what Jesus went through. And I think this is a natural thought we go to as Christians. To the cross and what Jesus has done for us. But I thought about it in a new light during that prayer. I really thought about what Jesus actually gave up. He gave up everything. Everything. Willingly. Laid down his life. Not just his career, not just his job, his security. He gave his life. And I thought about so many other people in history who had taken a stand for the truth and for what is right and for love. And they gave up their lives. And all of a sudden, giving up my career didn't seem that big of a deal anymore. And I found some peace. But I remember when I was taking the stand, I felt literally sick to my stomach. I was very nervous. I did not know whether those words would come out, whether I could say them. I had no script. So I started to nervously write down phrases and words, and I had them on my little cheat sheet, and I took that with me in the stand. And something happened when I was sitting in that stand. I looked over to my family. And behind my family, I saw all of these wonderful people, these supporters, wearing rainbow-colored stoles. There were far many of supporters in that room than antagonists. And I looked at them, and I looked at their eyes, and I saw them looking at me with love and support in their eyes. And I could feel their support. I could feel their prayers. And all of a sudden, it was like strength came back into me. And confidence was building in me. And I knew that I could do it. I knew that I could take this stand in front of this jury, in front of this judge, and in front of the entire United Methodist Church and the entire world. And I heard myself say things that they were just so. They were just right. And I was amazed at the words that came out of my mouth. And it reminded me of a passage that we find in Mark. And let me just find this passage. I want to read this to you. Mark 13:11 says, "Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time. For it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit." So the first thing I did after I got the court transcript, I went to that speech because I wanted to know, did I remember this right? Was it really just so? And tonight I want to actually read to you the exact words that came to me that night. I'm reading to you from the official court transcript. So I looked at the jury at that moment, and I said to them, "So before you make a decision, please know that I will continue to minister to all people equally, regardless of their gender, nationality, race, social status, economic status, and sexual orientation. And my message is going to be that we as a church and as individuals need to stop judging people based on their sexual orientation or anything else. We have to stop the hate speech. We have to stop treating them as second-class Christians. We have to stop harming beloved children of God. We have to reach out to them and treat them as Jesus would have treated them. That's going to be my message. And at that point, I reached into my pocket and I pulled out a rainbow-colored stole. And there's a story about the stole. If you look closer, you will see a name in the stole, the name of Anne Ewing. She's the wife of my counsel, one of my counsels. And the day before, Bill Ewing, my counsel, gave me this and said, "My wife wants you to have this." And so I said to the trial court, "I don't believe things happen by accident." I said, "I have been given this stole yesterday, this rainbow-colored stole. And with your permission, Bishop Gwynn, I would like to put this on me." And Bishop Gwynn allowed it. And so I put this stole on me, and I continued with my speech and said, "I will wear this rainbow-colored stole as a visible symbol and sign for you to understand that this is what I have to do from now on. I can no longer be a silent supporter, but I will now be an advocate, a spokesperson for my children, my gay children, and the entire LGBTQ community." And that is all I have to say. You know, I have been so worried about how I would live and what I would do and where my health insurance was going to come from and how I would continue to support my children in school. It turns out that if you're faithful and stand on your conscience, if you stand on the side of love, God will not let you down. Amen. I always say, as a defrocked minister, for a defrocked minister, I'm awfully busy, and it is so true. I have never preached this much in my entire life. Given this many lectures and speeches, and sat on panels, and did Q&As all over this country. There were only 2 Sundays that I wasn't invited. Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday. And I'm meeting so many beautiful people and supporters. And it's a moment of healing for me, and it's a moment of healing for the church whenever I share my story. It never fails. There are always people who come to me and say, some with tears in their eyes, "Thank you for what you have said and for what you have done, the stand that you have taken." I have never heard a preacher say those words in a United Methodist Church before. And it is beautiful how God is sustaining us financially through the support of people like you. How we are now on Obamacare, which just kicked in when we needed it once again. Tell you, it is affordable. It is actually a better plan than what I had through the Eastern Pennsylvania process. It is like God took what people meant for harm and He turned it into a movement that gives hope and joy to all of us. Never before has the United Methodist Church and other churches, mind you, other denominations, been involved in this open and honest of a dialogue about the LGBTQ issue since my trial. And I am so grateful that I became the lightning rod. It was all worth it, because now we're really talking. Now we're really trying to solve. Now we're really talking about changing the discipline for the very first time. Just 2 weeks ago, the connectional table, a rather conservative organ within the United Methodist Church, came to the conclusion that we have to start talking about a change to the discipline, the book of discipline. Wow! God is moving among us in mysterious and very powerful ways, and I can't wait to see what's next. I can't help but feel that we're at a tipping point, that something big is going to happen in this United Methodist Church. I thought it was so important for me to rejoin the United Methodist Church, this time as a church member, a lay member. When I joined the Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. That service was streamed. My sermon that day was streamed to thousands and thousands of United Methodist members. They wanted to know what I had to say just 3 days after I was defracked. And I had an opportunity to say to all of our LGBT supporters and to the LGBT community, to say, if you're sitting on the fence on where to go, please don't leave the United Methodist Church. We need you. We need you to bring about change. And that's why I rejoined the United Methodist Church. Because I believe that this change can and will happen in the name of all that is true, and in the name of love, and in the name of God. I truly believe that. God has made a statement through this trial and in the aftermath of this trial. And God is saying to the entire church, to the entire United Methodist Church, but beyond, is saying, take a stand. Even if you have to risk it all, take a stand. This is the time not to shy away, not to hide, not to be fearful. This is a time to step up boldly and take a stand for truth and for love and for our beloved children, fellow children, and brothers and sisters, and aunts and uncles, and cousins, and just all the members of our community that are LGBT. All of them. Because they are God's beloved children. Take a stand, and you will not regret it. Take a stand and see what I will do, says God. Amen. I guess I answered all questions.
Here we go.
how did my other children react throughout this? I got to be honest, my children really took this hard. My daughter Debbie was there at the trial, and it was hard for her. There were many tears. My son Pascal, even though he wasn't there, he took this very hard as well, and he developed some problems because of this in school, and became very anxious. My son Tim really surprised me, because even though he took the witness stand, and that was not easy for him, because he told his story, and it's a story filled with pain, and he re-experienced that. Even though he saw the ugliness of the trial and of the defrocking, he still kept on to his faith, even in the United Methodist Church. And just 6 or 7 weeks ago, he actually revealed to my wife and I that he's looking into seminaries. He's feeling a call. He's testing this call right now. But we were amazed at him, how he just put this away, and how he processed this, and how he has so much grace. And he's still active in the United Methodist Church. It's a reconciling church in Massachusetts, which is quite a different thing. And his pastor is actually openly gay, and he was at the trial to support him as well. So yes, there's joy, and there's also a concern for our children. It really affected them though.
We have one right back here.
I'm a Unitarian Universalist, so I have not to worry about being in your situation, but I am curious, given the history of both your tradition and the Christian tradition, is there any such thing as refrocking?
I love that expression. I've never heard that before, but I would like to be refrocked. Yes, please. Actually, I do have an appeal going, and it's going to be heard on June 20th, and I'm very, very hopeful that I might actually get refrocked. So I'm going to use that word, and thank you for that. Anybody else?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I happen to be a Lutheran, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and so we've gone through this as well. The national body in 2009 made it the policy of the American Lutheran Church to be welcoming and affirming. Unfortunately, policy is not always practiced. But we do reflock, and we did that after 2009, so it possibly has something to look forward to if the UMC will change its policies. My question is, unlike the Lutherans, the UMC is a global body, and so when it changes its rules, it changes it with a global vote. I think you would have a lot of support here in the United States, but what do you see as the prospects for South America and Africa?
Yes, I know, and that's being brought up almost every time I have Q&A. We are a global church as the United Methodist Church, and the problem is that our church has really grown by leaps and bounds, especially in Africa and parts of Asia, and that our church is also representative. And so at General Conference, which meets every 4 years, we have a lot of delegates from the African continent, from the Asian continent, and unfortunately, it so happens that at this point in time, the African church in general, the African conferences are more conservative on the issue and are struggling more with it than we are at this point. And we're a little bit further along, let me put it this way. And that is often quoted as a detriment, and that change is not possible. I don't know. I don't know that. I look at this less from the perspective of politics. And more from a perspective of faith. Amen. I truly, honestly believe that God is at work among us, and that God's work cannot be stopped. I know in my heart that something has got to give and something will change at the 2016 General Conference in Portland. I believe that with all my heart. So, even if the odds seem so against it now, I believe we'll see a change.
I just have a couple of comments, Frank. We talked a little bit ahead of time, and I've emailed you a number of times. I am retired United Methodist clergy, who's been in hiding for 35 years until I came to Tampa, Florida, and stood in front of the congregation at MCC Tampa and said, "I bring you greetings from the United Methodist Church," as a gay man for the first time we can preach and say that without being afraid. I was also student assistant at the United Methodist Church in New York City, John Street Church, years and years ago, when I was Snoop. And I was in that old church on Saturdays, and I found a record book of trials of church members who in 1760 to 1812 were tried for things like playing cards or swearing. And the trials were described just like you described. So very strange charges. But what I really want to say to you is, I think you are more Methodist than a lot of Methodists. And I've emailed you, and I think you are doing exactly what John Wesley would have done. Yes. And I think you are being more faithful as a defrocked clergy than some of us frocked clergies who refuse to itinerate, because you are doing exactly what Methodist pastors are supposed to do, is go house to house. And that is one of the promises that we make when we are ordained, is, are you willing to go house to house? And you're going house to house and changing one house at a time. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any comment or question? I think we're ready for refreshments, aren't we? It's a sign. Not quite.
So I have the grand privilege of telling you to find your wallets and your purses and your checkbooks. You described yourself, Frank, as a lightning rod. And you prefaced that by telling us you were indeed a reluctant lightning rod. Telling us it was your wife, Bridget, who told you to go into the light out from your closet. Telling us it was your son, Tim, who called you on the phone and said, "Dad, will you marry me to Bobby?" Asking you to come into the light. And you told us you stood in your trial before you spoke with the voice of the Holy Spirit saying, "I do not know what to speak or say." And you came into the light. Thank you. It's now our opportunity, sisters and brothers from Sarasota, and where are we all from? Bradenton? All over the place. We are all kinds of faith communities. We gather only 2 times a year with the name of Gain. We are so blessed to be family in this way, year in and year out. Tonight we have an opportunity to give in a way differently than we have in years past. Those who planned these events decided this year that we would take a very huge long shot. Frank did not come to us. We went to Frank. And we asked Frank if he would make the journey to us and bring his story to us. And we would then, in our time of offering, share everything that we raised tonight for Frank, that he might remain in the light. You said, how would I live and what would I do? This is how you will live and what you will do. And I will remind us that Nancy said, before ever you uttered a word tonight, that we need you, Frank, to not go away. Let us make that
We are called
On behalf of the Gulfcoast Affirming Interfaith Network, thank you for your presence and supporting tonight's service. We want to especially thank our host congregation, SunCoast Cathedral Institute. Our speakers, Judy Weinstein and the Bellevue, and of course, Reverend Frank Schaefer. Would you thank our speakers? We all know that that change is happening very rapidly in our country, from the opening of the military to GLBT service members and marriage equality winning in courtrooms and in ballot boxes. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is quoted as saying, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." These civil rights victories for the LGBT community would not be possible if we didn't have straight allies like Reverend Frank Schaefer. Speaking out and standing up for justice, simply because of the unconditional love and devotion a father has for his son. Reverend Frank, your story has touched many lives in this room tonight. These game services are a true community effort, and tonight's service owes so much to the leadership and vision of Deacon David Phillips. Please stay for a community reception in the back tonight. We hope all will stay and continue to fellowship and get to know one another. Thank you for coming out tonight, and would you welcome back Diversity, the Voices of Sarasota, as they close us in song.